corporate sabotage, a secret task force codenamed Project X, and a CEO who uses ChatGPT for legal advice. The Krafton lawsuit might just be my Roman Empire. If you haven't heard, South Korean game company Krafton is in a crap ton of drama. They're currently being sued for upwards of $250 million for allegedly firing the creators of the game Subnautica and knowingly and intentionally sabotaging the release of Subnautica 2 in order to avoid paying the dev team the hefty bonus that was promised to them in their contract. This lawsuit was filed back in July, but starting just a few days ago on November 17th, the case is now being argued in a Delaware court with a final decision expected to come sometime after January 9th, 2026. But before we dive into this drama-filled ocean of a lawsuit, a quick message from our sponsor, Instant Gaming. I love playing video games, but I don't like paying full price for them. Luckily, Instant Gaming has a variety of deals with amazing discounts, and best of all, their Black Friday sale is starting November 28th and running until December 1st, which means the deals are even juicier. During the Black Friday sale, new games will be unlocked every single day with exclusive discounts on titles like Anno 1800 and Pokemon Legends. Instant Gaming is also running this really cool promotion where every hour they'll be refunding a customer's cart. So not only can you get the awesome Black Friday deals, you might also get some games for free. Be sure to join Instant Gaming's Discord where they announce the winners, and use the link in the description to start shopping on Instant Gaming today. This story involves Charlie Cleveland, Max McGuire, and Ted Gill, the founders and leaders of Unknown Worlds, a game studio that was established way back in 2001. Reading into the history of this studio, it's actually really fascinating because Unknown Worlds began within the modding community of Half-Life. So before Charlie Cleveland and Max McGuire rose into these leadership positions as the heads of Unknown Worlds, they were developers themselves. They were modders, they were players just like us. But of course, Unknown Worlds as we know it today is synonymous with their smash hit Subnautica, and I cannot stress enough how successful and popular this game is. It released in 2018, sold over 6 million copies, it was well received by critics, nominated for multiple Game of the Year awards, and to this day it still has a very active community of players. Out of everything that's been said in this lawsuit so far, the one fact that is indisputable is that people love Subnautica. So we have Unknown Worlds and its leaders on one hand, and then we have the Leviathan, which is Krafton, on the other. In 2021, Krafton, the giant South Korean game company, went public, and during its IPO, it raised over $4 billion. So when they set out on their journey of being this public company and striving for the never-ending growth, like every corporation in a capitalist society, Krafton took one look at Unknown Worlds and they saw dollar signs, and they handed over $500 million for the studio. Krafton's acquisition of Unknown Worlds was not a decision that was made on a whim either. We now know, thanks to court documents, that Krafton CEO was the driving force behind the purchase of this studio. He looked at the Subnautica IP in particular and saw a ton of potential. He even had discussions with Charlie Cleveland about expanding the franchise into television and movies. So as part of the purchase agreement, Krafton promised two things when it comes to money. First, they would pay $500 million upfront for the purchase of the Unknown World studio. Secondly, and most importantly as it pertains to this case, Krafton promised that if the studio reached certain revenue targets by December 31st, 2025, they would pay an additional $250 million as a bonus to the founders and the development team. The caveat to that second stipulation is that these revenue goals that they needed to reach by the end of 2025 could not be met without releasing Subnautica 2. Both Krafton and the studio knew this when they signed the agreement. So essentially, the Unknown World studio would have to release Subnautica 2 by 2025 end of year in order to meet this deadline and get their $250 million bonus. So this means if everything went according to plan, Krafton would be paying a total of $750 million for the purchase of Unknown Worlds. This might sound like a ton of money because it is, but at the time of purchase, Krafton was flush with cash. As I said, they raised $4 billion during their IPO, and this is a company that has achieved a lot of success from their game PUBG, so they had the money to burn, and they really needed another successful, established franchise under their belt, and purchasing Unknown Worlds was a quick and surefire way to achieve that. From a business perspective, I think buying Unknown Worlds was a very smart move, just based on how massively successful Subnautica has been and how passionate this fan base is, as well as the fact that this franchise is still quite young. Subnautica was released in 2018, and it was a smash hit, so the potential for the sequel to be even bigger is still there. It's possible that this series could reach even greater heights, and it's that potential for future growth that sometimes puts a premium price tag on game studios like Unknown Worlds. Now, when Krafton purchased the studio, they also agreed to a few more things. They agreed that Unknown Worlds would have full control over release dates and development, not Krafton. So while Krafton was purchasing the studio, Unknown Worlds would remain as independent as possible. Krafton also agreed that they would not take any action that would prevent Unknown Worlds from receiving the $250 million bonus. And lastly, they agreed that they would not terminate the founders without cause. After the acquisition in 2021, things were hunky-dory for the next few years. The Unknown Worlds team, headed of course by Charlie, Max, and the studio's president Ted Gill, continued working from their San Francisco office and making progress toward that end of 2025 deadline that was given to them to ensure that they were paid their $250 million bonus. To be clear, as much as I'm sure everybody at that studio was passionate about the game and wanted it to be successful and wanted to make it the best they could, we cannot deny that money, particularly that bonus, was a motivating factor here. There's no world where the developers didn't want to meet that deadline and get their bonus. The reason Krafton put the bonus in the purchase agreement in the first place was to incentivize the team to finish the sequel by the end of 2025. This was a mutually beneficial arrangement. The studio finishes the game, they get their bonus, and Krafton makes a ton of money from sales. That was the point of the bonus in the first place. And by the time early 2025 rolled around, the team was nearly there. They were already finalizing the marketing budget for Subnautica 2. They were securing ad spots, reaching out to influencers for sponsored videos. According to court documents, Krafton's chief marketing officer told the Unknown Worlds founders that Subnautica 2 had more than enough content for an early access release in 2025. He even pointed to another Krafton game, Inzoi, which had released in early access with way less content than Subnautica 2. He basically said that game was shit and people still bought it. Subnautica 2 is way better, has way more content, it's ready. Also, according to court documents, in early 2025, Krafton stated that they were, quote, confident in Subnautica 2's potential, and they even applauded the, quote, progress the Unknown Worlds team had made ahead of early access, which was coming later that year. At this point in early 2025, everything was great. Krafton was happy, gearing up for Subnautica 2's early access release. The development team was on track to meet their deadline. Fans were so excited to be playing a new Subnautica game by the end of the year. But around March of 2025, things started getting a bit weird. Emails sent from Unknown Worlds to Krafton weren't being returned. Communication between developer and publisher went cold. What the Unknown Worlds studio didn't know at the time is that executives at Krafton had been running the numbers. In March 2025, Krafton compiled earnout projections for Subnautica 2 and estimated that the game would earn them between $190 and $240 million, which we have to note here would have been less than the $250 million bonus they would have to pay the Unknown Worlds team. Essentially, allegedly, purportedly, Krafton came to the conclusion that if they released Subnautica 2 in 2025, they would lose money. Krafton believed they couldn't do both. They couldn't release the game in 2025 and pay the developers their money that was promised in the purchase agreement. At this point, Krafton made it their mission to stop Subnautica 2's release. But the Unknown Worlds studio and its founders didn't know this. On May 20th, 2025, Charlie Cleveland met with Krafton CEO to discuss what exactly was going on. Why was communication souring between the studio and Krafton? During During that lunch meeting, Krafton's CEO told the Subnautica creator that paying the $250 million bonus would be, quote, disastrous financially and hugely embarrassing for Krafton. It was also revealed in court documents, and this is very juicy, Krafton's CEO believed paying the bonus would make him look like a, quote, pushover and could endanger his position as CEO. So it seems like they had this lunch meeting and Charlie Cleveland, the founder of Unknown Worlds, tried to assuage the concerns of the CEO. After all, Subnautica 2 is the most wishlisted game on Steam. Perhaps Krafton wasn't looking at the bigger picture, all the future earnings that this game could generate for years to come. But sadly, it appears that Krafton, led by the CEO, had already made up their mind. Subnautica 2 was not coming out in 2025 and they would not be paying the bonus. But if you remember, going back to the purchase agreement, Krafton wasn't allowed to dictate the terms of Subnautica 2's release. That was not in their control. That was Unknown World's decision to make. Krafton still had to fulfill their end of the deal. And as a reminder, this bonus was not a surprise to Krafton. It was stipulated in the purchase agreement they signed when they acquired Unknown Worlds. I also want to note something about the CEO's statement that paying the bonus would be, quote, disastrous financially for Krafton, because I found this article from earlier this year where Krafton's founder and chairman was essentially bragging about how much cash Krafton had on hand. He was saying they barely spent any of the money they got from their IPO, and that Krafton still has around $2 billion in cash reserves. So the funny thing about all of this is that, according to the founder, Krafton could afford to pay the bonus. The issue is that they didn't want to. It's my belief that Krafton looked at the purchase agreement and thought, $250 million is a lot of money. It's 1/8 of the total cash we have on hand. We've decided we don't want to pay the bonus. And I believe there's a bit of ego at play here as well. As we said, Krafton's CEO believed paying the bonus would make him look like a pushover. He believed Krafton forking over all this money would make him look bad. And because his position as CEO was coming up for a review in 2026, he was simply worried about his own job. If we take a step back, under this CEO's tutelage, Krafton has released a lot of flops. Moonbreaker, the Callisto Protocol, Defense Derby, Inzoi. These are all big budget, very expensive projects that Krafton sunk a lot of money into that have all failed miserably. So going back to that May 20th meeting that Charlie had with Krafton's CEO, when he said it would be disastrous financially for Krafton, it wasn't about whether Krafton could actually afford to pay the bonus, it was that they didn't want to afford it. And again, it's just my humble opinion, Krafton, don't sue me, but I believe the CEO wanted the brownie points of being able to go to the board of directors and the founder of Krafton, who's the chairman, and saying, forget about all those flop games that happened while I've been CEO. I just saved the company $250 million. Look at me, I'm so great. You should definitely renew my contract. Wow. Is this not clear as day to anyone else? If only the CEO hadn't been so messy about the whole thing. At the time that he had this lunch meeting with Charlie Cleveland, internally, Krafton was already working to sabotage Subnautica 2's release. They canceled all of the promo that was lined up. They stopped paying vendors. They were literally brainstorming ways to take over Unknown World's social media accounts without the founder's knowledge. And this is not conjecture, this is coming from court documents. On June 7th, Krafton's VP of Corporate Development, Maria Park, sent a message to the CEO suggesting that the company should attempt to take over Unknown World's social media accounts, quote, by force, if necessary. By force? This isn't a military operation, Maria. It's a Twitter account. But this is how dirty Krafton was playing this whole thing. At the same time, in communications to Unknown World's president, Ted Gill, this lady, who again was the VP of Corporate Development for Krafton, was basically playing dumb and telling Unknown Worlds to just keep waiting for a reply from Krafton, while they were working behind the scenes to sabotage everything. By June 12th, Krafton ordered staff to stop any and all communication with the founders. On June 19th, Krafton issued an official stop work order, telling the studio to cease any and all work on Subnautica 2 immediately. It appears that Unknown Worlds tried to negotiate. They said, we'll accept a $135 million reduction to the bonus, going from $250 million to $115 million, with $75 million going to the founders and $40 million going to the dev team. We don't have the full story here, but apparently Krafton wasn't even willing to accept this. And according to these chat logs, Krafton came back with an offer of a measly $10 million. What? They're not even trying to negotiate. How do you go from 250 to 10 million? When Unknown Worlds refused the offer, Krafton CEO responded in a message saying to set the date to take over the studio. Then came that fateful day on July 1st when Krafton fired Charlie Cleveland, Max McGuire, and Ted Gill and announced that they were being replaced with this guy named Steve.
I'm Steve.
Who is this man? Imagine being fired from the studio that you founded 20 years ago. And for fans of the franchise, they were absolutely rocked by this news. What do you mean the people who created this studio and this game have all been axed? What's going on? This next part has made headlines, but apparently Krafton's CEO even asked ChatGPT how Krafton could avoid paying the bonus. And I guess ChatGPT was ruthless as hell and it shot back, just fire him. That is so embarrassing for Krafton's CEO. Imagine being so incompetent as a leader and being so devoid of ideas that you have to go to ChatGPT to solve a problem that you created. Was this CEO's mind being possessed by an AI when he signed the purchase agreement to buy Unknown Worlds back in 2021? This contract that both parties signed agreed that Krafton would not have control over release dates and that they couldn't terminate the founders without cause. Yet here they were, controlling the release date and terminating the founders without cause. Krafton was so desperate to not pay this bonus that they even created a task force whose goal was to stop the early access release of Subnautica 2. This is not rumors or gossip, by the way. All of this has been revealed in court. They even gave the task force this cringe-ass name, Project X. You couldn't come up with anything better? Really? If all of this isn't proof that Krafton did everything in their power to delay the release of Subnautica 2 and avoid paying the bonus, then I don't know what to tell you. And I also just want to say the way Krafton handled the situation has been very messy and unprofessional. From the jump, they just threw the founders under the bus. They released this statement basically saying the founders aren't doing their jobs and they don't care about the game, so we fired them. It's just crazy to me that this huge $11 billion company was so dirty. Where's the PR team? Because this shit is messy as hell. I mean, sure, they gave the typical, we care about the players and that's why we're doing this nonsense that every massive game company does. But in the same statement, they didn't just throw the founders under the bus. They put that thing in reverse and drove over them again. By the way, I've seen a few people who may or may not be Krafton bots saying things like, the founders only cared about getting their bonus. They didn't care about the game. Krafton themselves said on multiple occasions that the game was ready for early access in 2025. Even if the founders stepped away into more creative roles and weren't focused on day-to-day management, which by the way, if I founded a company and led that company for 20 years, I'd probably want to step away by that time too, into a more creative, like visionary role. I don't blame them for that. Why wouldn't they want to do that? They weren't violating the purchase agreement by doing that. Besides that though, they still got the game to a place where it was ready for early access in 2025. So for Krafton and these random shills online to imply that the founders abandoned the game is patently false. Abandoned games do not reach early access after 3 to 4 years in development. And about the bonus, there were also a lot of people online saying, wow, the founders are so greedy, they only care about the money, they don't care about this game. It was not all going to Charlie, Max, and Ted. A portion was allocated to the dev team itself. Apparently back in 2021, when the studio was purchased, the founders shared those earnings with the developers as well. I'm not denying that the founders are not wealthy and privileged individuals. They created a successful studio that they ran for 20 years, but they're also not doing this for selfish reasons. Reading through the court filings, it really shows that the founders were just trying to do what was best for the studio. And what was best was meeting that end of 2025 deadline. And to me, all signs point toward Krafton simply not wanting to hold up their end of the bargain. Those messages show that Krafton was only willing to pay $10 million to the dev team. That's laughable. And yeah, this court case is still ongoing. It's still possible that there might be some revelations that paint the founders in a bad light, but I really can't understand anyone who would side with Krafton in this whole issue. I've made a few videos about another Krafton game, Inzoi, and I briefly touched on this lawsuit, and when I posted that video, I got at least 10 comments from people saying, no, it was the founders who did bad. That's wild to me. When all of this initially came to to light. Charlie Cleveland posted the statement on the Subnautica subreddit, part of which said this: "Suing a multi-billion-dollar company in a painful, public, and possibly protracted way was certainly not on my bucket list, but this needs to be made right. Subnautica has been my life's work, and I would never willingly abandon it or the amazing team that has poured their hearts into it. As for the earnout, the idea that Max, Ted, and I wanted to keep all of it for ourselves is totally untrue. I'm in the industry because I love it, not for riches. Historically, we've always shared our profits with the team and did the same when we sold the studio. You can be damn sure we'll continue with the earnout/bonus as well. They deserve it for all the incredible work for trying to get this great game into your hands." I know that there's still a lot of hype for this game, a lot of people who are still looking forward to it. As I said, it's the most wishlisted game on Steam. But I feel like if you love video games, if you care about game development, and if you care about what's right, you will not buy this game. If you buy this game when it releases, you are sending a message to Krafton that what they've done is okay. Krafton should be held accountable, not just in the court of law, but also in the court of public opinion. And I hope that fans of this game will vote with their wallets and show Krafton that they've gone too far. And yeah, I feel bad for the developers who are still at Unknown Worlds, many of whom probably have been with the studio for years. They're in a tough spot working under Krafton. I'm sure it's been a very difficult time for them with the firing of the founders and everything, but what Krafton has done is so scummy. There's been a lot of information released during the discovery phase of the court case and now with the arguments ongoing, and the judge has said that Krafton's argument is bewildering. They've called Krafton's defense frustrating. Unless the founders end up settling, I don't see this ending well for Krafton. There's a lot of people who know more about the law and especially how things operate in Delaware in particular. A lot of companies are incorporated in Delaware, I think due to tax reasons. And from what I understand, these Delaware courts really go by the book. They really look at the contract and they say, did you follow the contract or not? And in this case, Krafton clearly violated the contract. Some of you know that I live in South Korea, and I will say this is not unordinary behavior for Korean companies and politicians in Korea. The individuals and organizations in the society that have vast amounts of wealth and power, they don't even try to hide when they do shady shit. That has always shocked me. Even if you look at past Korean presidents, they're so blatant when they do something wrong, I think because they're so used to not being held accountable and believing that they're above punishment. So for me, just having lived in Korea, I'm used to seeing companies do things like Krafton has done and thinking they can get away with it. And I'm so glad to see these founders of Unknown Worlds stepping up and holding them accountable, because what they've done is not okay. If anyone is siding with Krafton at this point, they're either a corporate shill or a paid bot, because I just don't see how anyone could believe Krafton is in the right here. They said the game was ready for early access, and when they realized they couldn't make enough money from it, they backpedaled. They created a task force whose only objective was to delay the release. The CEO admitted to asking ChatGPT for advice on how to avoid paying the bonus. They issued internal stop work orders for Subnautica 2. They cut off the advertising budget. They stopped communication with the founders. Look, we have seen this story being told before. Maybe not as messy as this one, but we've seen countless tales of game studios being run through the ground once they're acquired by mega corporations. We know multi-billion-dollar game companies are greedy as hell. What multi-billion-dollar company isn't? And we also know that they're conniving and they'll do anything in their power to get what they want. The story with Unknown Worlds and Krafton is no different, except this time, Krafton was a bit too sloppy and they got caught. So maybe for once, we'll see a corporation be held accountable for its exploitative and scummy behavior. And I'll leave it at that.